Hello, my name is Paul Ellis, and this is Fast Talk. Our guest this evening represents the Palestine Liberation Organization. And it's interesting that at one time the PLO was considered a communist, terrorists, rebels, and now of late they've received a lot more respect. They're now being representatives for the Arab community. And our guest this evening is the permanent observer to the UN, Mr. Terzi. And we'll be back after a brief message to discuss some of the facts and issues behind the Palestine Liberation Organization. Welcome back. Our guest this evening is Mr. Terzi, the permanent observer to the UN from the PLO. And I'd like to start out by asking you from the introduction, you can see, it was at one time the PLO was considered were terrorists, were not nice guys. Now all of a sudden the Marines are coming into Lebanon. The view of the PLO is changing. Why and what causes that?
Well, I think the blame is firstly on the misconception and the misinformation of what is the Palestine Liberation Organization, that is the PLO. Now, after 16 years of displacement and the failure on the part of the United Nations to redress the injustice that befell the Palestinian people, the Palestinian people got together and proclaimed the PLO as the umbrella of the Palestinian people. And the aim was, and continues to be that the injustice should be redressed, that the Palestinians should be able to live in peace in their own homes. Now,
the injustice being
that they're dividing the country and fragmenting the people and expelling the people. And even at gunpoint, there were some cases where there were massacres committed in order to create an atmosphere of intimidation to force the Palestinians to leave their homes. Like in 1949, there was the case in the village of Deir Yassin, where more than 250 innocent people were sort of butchered in cold blood.
So the PLO is organized to represent your case, the Palestinians' case, or to actually fight in the name of the Palestinians?
Well, the PLO is the Palestinian people. It's, as I was trying to explain to you, and the structural status of the PLO, you might say the governmental, the statal structure of the PLO was entrusted by the Palestinian people to carry on with the struggle of the Palestinian people to regain their rights and live in peace in their homes.
Their rights, I assume you're saying a homeland.
Well,
a place to call their own.
Well, a place they have, but they were thrown out from, and that in this place, which is Palestine, within the borders that were known, that's between the River Jordan on one side and the Mediterranean Sea on the other side, and that in this country of theirs, Palestinians, we should be free to exercise our rights, like right to self-determination, electing our own representatives and establishing our own government, maintaining our traditions, our own schooling, And this apparently needed a lot of struggling to do.
This is the piece of land that was lost to Israel in a war, yes?
No, you see, I wouldn't say that it was lost in a war. There was an invasion for which the Palestinians were not prepared. Apparently, I mean, the history behind that seems to be very little known. The British mandate had helped to change the population, the demographic structure in the country, and help the Zionist groups to bring their armed people into the country.
Establishing the state of
and
Israel.
Establishing a state at the cost of expelling the indigenous population, which is the Palestinian people.
So the complaint that you have, or the Palestinians have with Israel, is not the same complaint that the other Arab nations have with Israel.
No, I mean, the complaint that the Arab nation has, the Arab governments have, emanates from the original complaint, which is the complaint of the Palestinian people, if I could use the same expression you have. And there is a consensus in the world that the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict is the Palestinians. And the moment a solution, a just solution, is found to this Palestinian problem, would lead into a solution to the other state of conflict, and it will bring peace about.
Okay, we will be back after a brief message to discuss more in detail these issues. Welcome back. We have as our guest tonight the UN observer for the Palestine Liberation Organization. You say that your case is self-determination, a land and a country of your own. My next question is, when you have this country, you say that's going to bring about peace in the Middle East, what kind of country would it be? I mean, you must have plans, but all this time to plan a nation, what would it be? What kind of a government, what kind of a life would be going on there?
Well, to be very blunt about it, I cannot tell you beforehand what sort of a country, what sort of a government we will have. But I can assure you of this, that after more than 30 years of dispersion and misery, it will be the country and the aim will be motivated for peace and the development and the welfare of our people.
The Palestinians, who are now refugees in a number of places, would then, you're saying, decide what kind of you would hold some sort of an election, some sort of a way of determining.
Precisely.
Not necessarily, Yasser Arafat may not necessarily wind up in any kind of position.
Well,
that would be up for
I cannot assure you of anything. Once we get back into our own country and exercise, just like you do, you know, you get one Republican, one Democrat.
Right,
you may like Reagan, you may not like Carter.
Right.
And this is exactly what we plan to have. Once we get there, anybody would have the right to come out with a platform and whoever
Wait.
gets the better vote gets there.
I guess what I'm leading to is that a good bit of the Middle East crisis, as far as I can see it anyway, a good bit of it is motivated by outside forces. There's a whole lot of other things going on there, I think, other than just a simple...
Well, you know, we're not talking about outer space, you know, we're talking about an area full of people.
Yeah, but there's the United States is backing one side, the Soviet Union backs another side, there's all the oil issues going on. Doesn't that all interfere with your basic,
Well,
30 years ago?
you're very right there that this is not an isolated factor or an isolated case. It's linked, I would say, organically with many other factors. But the first factor should be and is the human factor.
Right.
And the human factor is...
And it usually winds up being the last.
Well, it's being completely disregarded and in many cases even ruled out. Now, once you settle this human factor, then you can adjust or at least discuss the other factors in the light of the human factor. But you cannot really discuss anything or consider, let's talk about peace. How can you expect anyone who is denied the right to be in his own home and living in peace, how can you expect such a person to worry about the peace of the others?
True.
So that's why we keep telling our friends that in order to have peace, we must have we must be in a state of peace of mind and live in peace.
That's your first step. Before you can have anything beyond any kind of peace, first step is to have a place to go to, a homeland.
Well, to have our place, not a place.
Your place.
Our place. I mean, we're not ambitioning the Dakotas here. We're
you wouldn't
ambitioning
settle
to go back
for
home.
Uganda or somewhere in Mongolia. You want the place you started in.
Well, I would tell you there's something called home, and we'll settle for nothing less than home.
Well, now, the Israelis, the people who fought or decided to found the State of Israel, claim that that's their homeland. That's the Jewish homeland, the Jewish state. If you want self-determination for your people, you can't very well deny them, nor if they want self-determination can they deny you the same.
Well, you see, after the war from 39 to 45, where there was so much exclusiveness, the exclusiveness of some race in Europe, we're shocked to hear that somebody wants still to have an exclusivist state of his own. There's plenty of room in Palestine for everybody. I mean, all it is now is that there are about 4 million Palestinians and there are about 4 million Israelis and 8 million all told, and the little island of Manhattan can take more than 8 million, and Palestine is much larger. So there is plenty of room for everybody to live there.
To share in that part of the country,
Exactly.
that part of the world.
Exactly.
I see. You align yourself with predominantly third world people, yes?
We are.
Third world struggles like the Vietnamese, like the Cambodians, that kind of world struggle that we hear about. Are they not socialist states, communist influenced socialist states? The point I'm trying to make is it not really a Cold War enactment going on out there in the Middle East?
No, I mean, we're part of the non-aligned movement, and in that non-aligned movement we have countries like Panama, like Peru, we have countries like India, like Pakistan. So why do you put the label immediately?
Oh, I'm asking.
I'm sorry.
I'm asking for...
No, I mean, nobody has a justification or reason or a good cause to put the label. You wait until the people choose for themselves what is best for them.
Another confusion that comes out of the Middle East crisis, and it's a great, wonderful term, Middle East crisis, it's a war, is the religious aspect, that it's a religious war, that it's a Jewish state, a religious war.
No. I mean, wait. I mean, don't mix up issues because...
Right, well, that's a mix-up. I want to clear up issues.
No,
I'm saying that's a mix-up.
It is not a religious war in any way. And I'll tell you this, in the ranks of the Palestinians in the PLO, for example, there is no difference whatsoever between a Christian or a Muslim. Some leaders are Christians, good Christians, some of them, some are Muslims. We don't differentiate.
But there are no Jews in the
No,
PLO.
precisely, and I hear you. I'm glad you answered my problem. Even in Palestine, I would say I belong to a generation that lived happy together in Jerusalem. I mean, I was born in Jerusalem and raised in Jerusalem.
You were
And
there before the State
I
of
was,
Israel.
oh yes, long before that. And of course we lived happy together. But then we got conscious of some elements who tried to capitalize on the Jewish faith for political reasons. And that's where the confrontation started.
Well, isn't that kind of, it clouds the issue. What you're saying is that whole Jewishness has been clouding the issue, but what happens on a world level, on a world scale, is a lot of resurgence of anti-Semitism in that clouding. It hasn't turned out good for them. It hasn't turned out as a positive tool of late.
Well, of late you say, I don't know, I mean, I'm not the spokesman for that, but I have my fears that the extremism and the fanaticism and the exclusivism of those in Tel Aviv is leading into an awareness maybe, or into some anti-Israeli tendencies, which in the United States are being interpreted as being anti-Jewish. I refuse to say anti-Semitic because, after all, I'm a Semite myself.
True.
So,
we will be right back after a brief message to discuss more about the Middle East, the PLO, and the State of Israel. Welcome back. Our guest this evening is Mr. Terzi, the PLO observer to the UN, and we've been discussing the issues of the Middle East. And what I'd like to know, we know some of the history, we know where you've been. Of late, we know where you've been moved to. What happens now? The PLO has now been moved out of Lebanon. The army has been moved out. There have been a lot of things that have taken place. Where do you go now? What's your next step?
well, I would be much more concerned about the fate of peace in the area, let's say.
Okay.
If our armed elements are moved from one place to another, that could be settled internally between us and what is known as the host countries. But there's one thing that I should stress here. Since 1974, there is an increasing knowledge of what the true issue is. And as a result, the international community has arrived at a consensus. I wish it was unanimity, but it is a consensus that there is such a thing as a Palestinian people, that this Palestinian people has rights like any other people, and those rights have to be exercised by this people in its own country and in its home. And among those rights is that the Palestinians should exercise the right to self-determination. After all, Woodrow Wilson did not just come out with the idea of self-determination as a hoax, he meant it.
Right.
And the entire international community now supports the right of the Palestinian people to exercise their self-determination in their own
So
country.
now what's the problem?
Now,
Where
the problem
own
is,
country is?
now the problem. Now, there is unanimity in this case and not just a consensus that Israel, the occupied territories, Palestinian territories in 1967, and there is unanimity that Israel should pull out of those territories. Now, we maintain now that in those territories, the Palestinian people can settle in peace, can exercise their right to self-determination.
So you would be willing to move the border of Israel and let Israel have Israel and you have your
Well, I wish
Palestine?
you could tell me what the border of Israel is.
Well, they've moved it in war after war. It keeps moving around the map.
you
There
see,
must
if-
be an original piece of land that was designated as Israel in 1948, 1949.
Precisely. That line has been, let's say, crossed several years ago,
It's
and
been moved all
Israel
the time.
grabbed much more than it was
The famous
given.
Six-Day
you know.
War, yes?
Well, the Six-Day War, and even recently they even occupied Lebanon. So you see, their thirst for devouring more territory is very clear. Now, we believe that Israel should go back, at least as a first step, to the frontiers of 1967. And I would say the lines, it will be more a better expression. Now, in the Palestinian territory, from which Israel will withdraw, the Palestinians will exercise their right to self-determination. And the Palestinians have already said they wanted to have their own state. Now, once that state is established, then it is up to that state, through its legislative assembly, which will come in as a result of national elections, decide on the future policy to be followed and relations with their neighbors.
Now, my question again is that you would not, I've heard on a number of occasions that the PLO is committed to the destruction of the State of Israel.
Well, again, this is not correct. Some people speak about our charter, including such a clause. There is no such clause, I assure you.
There is no
this
such
is a
clause in the charter.
misquotation. The clause in the charter says that we will fight the Zionist structure, and as you know, everyone has the right to fight against any sort of ideology, and this is our right as
So
well.
you differentiate between Zionist structure and the State of Israel. Thus,
Well, I
Israel
would-
was founded by a group of Zionists, no doubt.
Well, see, I believe that if Einstein were still alive, he would condemn the present state of Israel the way he condemned Begin in 1949. Because he had Einstein and the founders of the haven called Zionist, the Zionist state, differed basically from the Zionist practices. It is shocking that the present Zionist junta in Tel Aviv is adopting and applying the same methods that were used by the unnameable Europeans during the years, the late 30s.
Well, there's a word that's been thrown about a lot in this whole thing is Holocaust on both sides. The recent Beirut massacre has been compared to the Holocaust.
Well, it is a Holocaust. I mean,
it's a word that's used to gain fervor and to get
well,
emotionally
I would say
charged.
Holocaust is not exclusive to one group of people. By the same way, the Nazis committed this Holocaust, and there were a number of million, about 5 or 6 million, who were of the Jewish faith, but there were many other millions of other faiths who were the victims of the Holocaust. And again, as a result of the same practice of Holocaust, a number of Palestinians, about 5,000 of them, were butchered in cold blood in the refugee camp. We do not discriminate between the victims of a Holocaust. We all pay tribute and honor those equally.
You use that word to define any form of genocide,
Well,
no matter who the
Holocaust,
victim is.
no matter who the victim and no matter who the criminal is in this case.
Now, if we go back, many, many acts of terrorism have been laid at the feet of the PLO. The PLO have been the cause of many acts of terrorism. That certainly doesn't gain you world popularity. will we see this kind of thing stop as you get closer and closer to this
Well,
unanimous decision?
I don't want to use too much of your time, but there is not yet a decisive definition of terrorism. Any act of violence could not be treated in isolation from the motives for that act. When the United States dropped and sent its troops to liberate Europe, that was not an act of terrorism, that was a justified act of liberating Europe from the yoke of the Nazis. So when a Palestinian wants to go back to his home, he has the right, and this right is also endorsed by the United Nations. He has the right to exercise all forms of struggle, including armed struggle. Naturally, and this is sad to say, some forms, sometimes the victims are mostly innocent people. But you must understand and know that in our National Council, which is part of the structure of the PLO, we have something called the National Council, some sort of a parliament or a Congress as you have here. And we have taken a decision, very clear-cut decision. We condemn all forms of terrorism, and in particular, acts of state terrorism. And as a matter of fact, we have condemned all those acts of terrorism, like when there was shooting at the restaurant in Paris, for example.
Right.
Well, that was a cold-blooded act of terrorism.
Well,
when the synagogue was attacked in Rome 2 weeks ago, we thought this was an act of terrorism, not because only there was a child, a 2-year-old child that was the victim, but to attack in such a way, criminal way, a synagogue, for us is an act of terrorism.
Isn't a lot of that happening, though, as people, like we were talking about before, cloud the issue with a religious connotation, with saying that, almost justifying those acts on innocent Jews or innocent Arabs, for that fact, as a way of picking sides, of pitting somebody against the other?
Well,
and see a lot of that rearing its ugly head
I would say that
now?
religion in this case has nothing to do with the roots. It is just a cover-up or something to capitalize on.
So that anyone who's using anti-Semitism, using your cause to justify their anti-Semitic acts, is not clearly defined of the cause that you...
Well, I think anyone who just goes to a synagogue and throws a bomb, he's doing more injustice to me
Right, that's what I would
than
think.
he's doing to the
They're
others.
certainly not going to help your case.
On the contrary, he's doing me much more
Sure.
damage, yes.
Again,
After all, I mean, let me tell you this. Those people who commit those crimes, they killed quite a good number of the PLO representatives in Europe. As a matter of fact, the Israeli ambassador who was shot in London on the eve of the Israeli invasion, well, one of the criminals arrested had a hit list with him, and the second on the hit list was supposed to be the PLO representative in London.
Really?
So here was a mercenary who was there to shoot at random maybe, or criminally motivated. The ambassador of Israel was one victim, and the next victim would have been the PLO representative.
are we
So-
getting closer to the PLO and Israel sitting down and solving these problems? Are we getting closer to that, or are we going to start to see more, again, more violence, more confused issues, more intervention by major nations?
Well, I have to make it again, explain it very clear. We have to resolve the problem in the most efficient way and peaceably. And we thought, and we still think, that the framework, this vehicle of peace called the United Nations, could serve as the best vehicle to bring people together. And this is why we have high hopes on this vehicle of peace called the United Nations. Because somebody tried to reach peace outside the UN. I'm talking about the Sadat and Camp David and Begin.
Right, that whole thing.
But the Camp David, what did it bring us to? It brought us to the invasion of Lebanon, and not to peace in the area.
Right, well, I kind of think that it's hardly coincidental that the invasion of Lebanon occurred at the same time there was a summit conference in Europe, and now we have European soldiers protecting that area.
Oh, wait, you see, the plan to invade Lebanon was there in the doing for more than 1 year. So, and that does not hide away the fact. that according to the leaders in Tel Aviv, since 1919, they want to have the river Litani in Lebanon as the northern frontier or border between Israel and Lebanon. And unfortunately, these are the known facts. I say unfortunately to the people in Tel Aviv. Even in 1954, Moshe Sharet, who was, I think, foreign minister at that time, disclosed that there was a plan to invade South Lebanon and appoint some sort of a Christian officer in order to create a Christian-Muslim division in the country, but sort of enforcing and entrenching Israeli dominance over that region.
So that's what's kind of happened now.
Exactly.
There is a Christian government, Christian leader